Blogtalk Radio.
Hostage to the Devil by James Bravewolf. Mystique, a false reality that you must accept or be broken, that you must worship or be ostracized, that you must love or be damned. I was there when my father was dying. The doctors said it was a miracle that he was still alive, because everything physical inside of him had broken down. They couldn't understand what was keeping him alive. And of course, in his room, in all the rooms, there was the television screen, those newly installed flat screens filled with the mystique. But my father rebelled in those final moments against the mystique. His will fought to remain intact, something the doctors and the flat screen could not understand, will never understand. Hours before he died, he entered the privacy of his own dreams and his own willpower. In that room, he motioned for the television screen to be shut off, and then he began to knit. He began to sew something invisible, his hands working in front of him as if he had needle and thread. How concentrated his eyes were on his invisible work. My father, his body broken inside, was stitching something together. Was when he was a child and they were very poor? Was that what he was stitching? Or was he stitching his life back together again, the mistakes he had made, to make everything right again? I sat there and watched him, this man so charismatically strong, like oak, whose hands and arms and neck, especially his neck, held an ancient European truth and depth. I sat there and watched him and did not dare make a sound, for he was already crossing the bridge. And with each imaginary stitch he made, he was actualizing himself. He was defeating the programming. I believe he was gathering power with each imaginary stitch to reclaim his life and stitch his personality back in harmony with his soul. By saying, I don't believe the story you told me, the mystique you've cloaked yourself within, there on your video screens. So much of our thoughts and your thoughts and actions are decided by the mystique. The mystique is the image that the machine wears to hide its original face. We have surrendered to the mystique. Think of the image of, say, Marilyn Monroe. It is thrust upon everyone constantly, day after day, all over the world. But why was she chosen? And for what purpose do they want us to know Marilyn Monroe? Every day you and I see an image of her. This is called social programming. I could offer you 1,000 other examples of things we accept as cool that in reality are grotesque, if not for the perfume and cosmetics of the mystique. And yes, Marilyn Monroe was grotesque, a disturbed woman who had long ago given up her original soul, not as a victim, but as a willing player within the machine. A machine she was glad to join. And now this same machine is telling us how to die and who to worship. Now the mystique is putting right before your very eyes, as you are dying, the television screen. This mystique comes in the shape of a man who betrayed generations with his drugs and his CIA credentials, all hidden behind his persona of peace and love. It is his image that is being projected on that flat screen TV to tell you to let go of your authentic self and enter into nothingness. But of course, the nothingness is beautifully made over with his mystique. The reality that is suffocating under the brutality of the mystique is that we must not lose ourselves at the moment of our death. We must think of our life, for somewhere buried within the programming that fills your mind is your one blessed moment when you were your true self and loved someone. But we worship the mystique, and the former 1960s guru, machine change agent extraordinaire, is reaching out one last time to program us right at the moment when we die. He wants to be the last thing you hear in your earthly life, when he never believed a word of what he preached. It's not safe to criticize him. He's beyond criticism. The mystique has so many, many followers, and they defend him with a blind fury. So I don't dare write his name or speak his name in this story. You see how the mystique works? We are afraid of the mystique because it can so easily turn on us. Volatile it is and arrogant. It can never be corrected. It can never be wrong. How many young lovers today censor themselves, don't say anything, don't even think anything different. We want to have a good life. Just accept the mystique. And if it is grotesque, it won't touch us. Let it touch someone else. But it will touch you, with a debt passed on to your children and to all those you love. For mystique is what they cloak themselves in to become our masters, to make the world empty, like metallic winter. We have been so conditioned to be afraid of everything. This is another kind of social programming. They pump you with fear on a daily basis, with the gruesome and the horrific. Don't you know those images stay in your mind, and that this fear does something once it is inside you? They make you afraid on purpose, so that you become a prisoner, unable to face your death, remembering the one moment where you love someone with sincerity. That is social programming. Haven't we learned yet that those on the television and movie screen can never be trusted? That the mystique of the machine destroys authentic community? I had to take my dog Smitty to die last year. Smitty was with me for 17 years. He was loved and given peanut butter and French vanilla yogurt all his life. A smooth-haired border collie that never wanted to leave the couch, but when he ran, he could run for hours on end and return crawling, so exhausted and so happy. Smitty peed on my jacket when I first got him at the animal shelter in Boston, marking me as his. And I was so very, very thankful to be his. He had been abandoned in Boston and could barely walk. I was proud to give him a home. And 17 years later, when I took him to die, he had gone deaf and could not bark. He could not tell me if he was suffering. He was bleeding in his urine, and his back legs had collapsed. I had to carry him to the bathroom. And taking him to die was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. For he knew when I put him in the back seat of the car that he was going to die. Smitty lay on the table, and the veterinarian shaved a little patch on his leg and began to place the needle in. Smitty hated shots and was afraid of the vet, and he started to react, to move his head toward his leg in self-protection. And I put my hand into Smitty's mouth, and suddenly he tasted me, the one he marked so long ago when he was only a puppy. And he relaxed and began to lick my hand. The veterinarian looked at me, and I nodded my head, and my Smitty went across the bridge, hopefully remembering that day of marking when he made me his pack and was loved in return. And my partner, Lala Denoto, has written these words that are very, very important. And I'm glad to leave them on an audio recording as our legacy. And she writes, "Your soul talks to you all the time to get you to listen, but we don't listen. The artificial personality that was built by the daily program we all face is not equipped to assess the soul or to work with it or describe it to our conscious mind. Because soul has little to do with the false personalities constructed by the world, the socio-economic construct. This is the conundrum. We can't know the soul with the mind, and the false personality is mind without substance. The real personality is an aspect of the soul and related to it. So it could help us understand our soul. But because of the mystique, and the constant programming, the real personality is not allowed the opportunity to grow into itself. And Lala writes, sadly, I learned all this the hard way.
Hello. Tonight's episode of Crossing the Bridge is called Learning to Accept the Unacceptable, Living in a Trance World. As part of a programmed society, a society that is indoctrinated into a certain mindset, we are encouraged to seek out and take from everything to new experiences as part of personal growth, without knowing the real implications or meaning of the things that we sample. These alternative approaches are mostly just synthesized into our existing programming. They enhance it rather than being an alternative to it. And hello, Brave Wolf. Maybe we need to explain taking everything from everywhere.
Yes, I mean we don't check the ingredients as we do when we go to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or where we shop. We just accept. And we accept because of the mystique. If it's on CNN, if it's on NPR, it's beyond question. And then we put it into our minds and it becomes us. And we go further and further away from our own instinct. And we accept things that we haven't validated with critical thinking. We haven't assessed at all. And then we are left defenseless and without a way to get back to our original self. And this is where people break down, and I see it every single day. People breaking down in all socioeconomic classes, breaking down and then trying to look for the pop culture or whatever culture they find that they're in. They look for these things as a ladder to get out, and there is no ladder. So all they are left with is these empty icons, the pop culture that has been orchestrated to be empty. And
right,
I have
there's been a lot of emphasis in the personal growth movement to take symbols and religions and religious practices, deities, beliefs, cathartic release in psychology, and to try all of these things, a lot of them from Eastern cultures, without knowing the underlying application that they have, and they're seen as enhancing consciousness, right? Without knowing how they alter you, how they alter brain chemistry and perception, or how they might boost capacity to live within a type of a trance.
These are done, Lala, to accept the unacceptable. These are the layers that make people feel that they are progressing while they are accepting the unacceptable. And I think what you're talking about is very, very true and is happening. And let me kind of break it down for in a story, in a damn true story. And I worked with an executive once who knew life was a story. And he told me that. He had no idea my background, but he seemed to trust me in the role we had. And he worked for a great pharmaceutical company, enormously powerful all over the world. And he told me one day, he said, and he was 40 years old, and he had just reached almost the third level of in the corporate structure, so an immensely profitable and important level. And he was not from the United States, he was from another country. And he said to me, everything, James, is a story. We're living in somebody's story. It's not real. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, it's a mystique. It's a story. And then I said, well, what is underneath the story? He said, there's reality, and then there's the reality of this story that is someone else's. And I found out what he did was he took photographs in order to, working within the machine, knowing the mystique was there, this very bright, creative, observant guy, knew what he was involved in, but could not leave because the money was so enormously good for him. And what he did to try to stay sane is he went to all the countries where he had to visit, and he took pictures of urinals, the most dirty, the most disgusting, the most beautiful, every urinal he could imagine. And he showed me his collection. And I said, well, why urinals? And he said, because that's what is beneath the mystique. And I was so struck by that. And then I remembered my epiphany, and I think this was his epiphany. And my epiphany was understanding what was behind the mystique was when I was my first year at university in Boston, and I took a job dog walking. And the woman who owned the mansion in Boston was the head of Freudian psychology in the United States, and she led I won't say the name of the hospital, but it's very famous, and she led the psychiatric unit of this hospital in Freudian psychology. And what she had every Tuesday and Thursday night, she had a women's empowerment group of young college students, and this is the 80s, where she did the mystique. She was telling them how to empower themselves. Okay, and this was the layer. This was the mystique. This was the false idols, the false religions, the false ideas. And in reality, well, she had two teenage boys who she paid no attention to. She was a divorce situation. And those children were so filled with hate that she was spending these nights with these groups of women and not with them. And I was brought in to walk the dog. And the dog was kept in the cellar of the house. And what they would do is keep the dog in the dark cellar the whole day, and when I would come, I would have to clean the feces and the urine from the basement and then take the dog along the reservoir in Chestnut Hill and walk the dog. And during the days when I would come, before I would come, and as I arrived, the two boys would be on the cellar steps, and they had tennis balls in their hands, and they would be throwing the ball at the dog. And the dog would sit there looking at the light because the door was open behind the boys. And they were torturing that dog with baseballs, with tennis balls, with golf balls. And the woman was in the room with these young university students. And this was the reality going on. And I was so sickened by this reality. And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stop it. I took the dog, I kept going, I took the dog for a walk, and then would have to put the dog back into that cellar, back into the programming. And her, with her mystique of being this prominent person in psychology, and these women, young women, worshiping her. And this, such false mystique, this has stayed with me and really deeply affected me. I will never forget that dog. And one of the women I met, one of the university students who went to that group, when I finished my work, they would finish their class, and we would walk across the street to campus. And I found out she was leaving school and she was going to Oregon, to a Bhagwan, to a group, a guru. And I had no idea about these things. I had no idea. And she went, and I didn't see her for months. And months later, she returned, and I was still walking the dog. And I said, how was it? And she looked like a slave,
zombie.
like a zombie. And I said, well, what happened? She said, well, For 1 week, we went into a room, and I took off all my clothes, and I had sex with anyone who wanted. In that whole room, we were meant to have sex with everyone. And I didn't, not that I was naive, but I had no idea of how to handle that at 19 years old. And I just felt so sorry for her. But she was so damaged from that. And she asked me to go for a walk in Wellesley. She knew I had come from Wellesley. And we walked to Wellesley College around the Lake Waban, and we went into the Italian Gardens. And it was 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And she took off all her clothes there at the top and said, "I am not me. I am not me." And I stood there and I had no idea what she was talking about. And she just started to cry and drop. And I just stood there. And finally she dressed again. And we went back to our cars, and I never saw her again. But that trauma with the dog, with her, and with that woman in such a prominent position, that is, I think, for me, when I knew that this mystique, that this woman you could never criticize. You could not criticize this woman for that dog in the basement and for what she did to this woman, this young girl. And I think for me, that was my moment where I saw we were living in someone's story and we were forbidden to express any kind of dismay, to say, this is just basically wrong. And I wonder how many people who are listening and how many people out there have similar stories and they will not speak them. But damn it, this is, for me, that dog was, and that was 30 years ago. And that dog I will never forget, down there being tortured in the dark.
Yes, well, those are stunning stories, and it sounds like the prominent women's group leader, it's like she kept her dark side in the basement and then lived the mystique upstairs in the light with her, persona as a cult leader. And also the girl that joined the Bhagwan group.
Bhagwan, yes.
There's nothing like a cult to, surround yourself with people that will.
Once she was empty, she needed something.
Your programming, yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
But
Hello,
we have
do we
a
have
caller?
a caller? Yes, I'm
yes,
sorry I went on too long, maybe.
Hi, caller. Kevin, hi.
Hello.
Hello. Good
How
evening,
is everyone
Kevin.
this evening?
We are expressing
fine,
ourselves, for good or for bad. We'll let others judge that, but
well,
we are
that is what it's all
expressing.
about. One
guess
isn't here to preach doctrine. One is here to provide information for those to digest and to determine their own use of it.
Oh, I agree 100%. Yeah, you're right, Kevin. And that's all we want to do is put it out for thought.
So an interesting topic this evening. Of course, they're always interesting.
Okay.
You guys go into some uncharted space.
Yeah, we will see the response to that, but there's little time left for, again, the mystique. So.
Well, I like that word. And in my mind, it comes to me that it's a synthesis of mythology and technique.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The idea being, now, okay, we had discussed the idea of the imposition of the machine into an unwitting society. However, over a slight period of time, it wasn't about the machine anymore. It was about the adjustment tools needed to adjust the psyche of the people to the machine.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of nano gray goo that started just spreading itself out through society, infiltrating the military, infiltrating the schools, infiltrating the state, infiltrating business, all institutions in the society. And realizing that, well, it's not the people aren't evil. I believe that man is cooperative, and that is his inherent weakness. He's cooperative. And if you provide something that is feasible, credible, first you set up your credentials, you do all of this stuff, and you say these words, these hypnotic words, so people are like, well, why would he lie to me? Distrust isn't part of human nature from the beginning. Cultures don't lie. This culture decided that somehow that's okay to do that. But there is no real deceit in real indigenous culture. It just doesn't exist. There's no need for it.
Right.
But this is something that, again, has slowly been engineered into the culture. Again, I believe simply to keep the whole idea, whether it's deconstructed or whatever, the idea of monarchy and the control of the landed, quote-unquote, class, the result of the enclosure movement, keep those people feeling like they got something, like they own something. Again, this abstract word. And realizing, I'm sure, that they knew that the human being was a cooperative person and that we work for our better interests, not mine, not yours, not Lala's, but our collective interest, and that we have a collective understanding of what that is.
Right.
Well, there's been an attack on that reality, right? The serious attack on that reality. And so now loyalties are to, again, the essence of this new construct of the machine built by mythology, technique, / mystique. It's like, oh my goodness. I mean, if you look at it, the United States is a psychological construct.
Yes.
Everything about it is psychological. There's nothing concrete about the United States. The United States is built on nothing but myth, symbols, stereotypes, and prejudices.
Absolutely.
And either they're racial or economic or other abstract perceptions of those four realities. Every man, woman, and child in this country operates under that premise. Mythology itself is interesting. Mythology in this country is based on history and science. And there have been, through the texts and the whatever, through the early 20th century, Freud, Jung, Walter Lippmann, Lasswell, Lassersfeld, Katz, all of these people determined that there are 5 great myths that basically hold this society together. The myth of progress, the myth of youth, the myth of happiness, the myth of nation, and the myth of the hero. You alluded to that earlier when you talked about how people got this sort of star worship, celebrity worship.
Right.
That's been fostered. It's the whole thing. It is used. It is this mythology that allowed the business class in this country to shape a new world of view.
Absolutely. And you know what? We are out of time.
Oh, Kevin, I'm sorry I went on too long. You bring such quality things, and you bring such. I think what you're talking about connects so much to why they are programming and how they have programmed. Yes. So I hope, Kevin, you can call back. Yes, please. And we can talk more about this because you add so much. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Hey, fabulous guys. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Good night, Lala.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks for listening.